The rain hammered down on the muddy streets of Friesauth, Germany. April 14, 1945. The war was ending, everyone knew it. But that made what happened next even more incomprehensible. General Harry Crerar stood in his command post, water dripping from his greatcoat onto the maps spread across the wooden table. The 48-year-old Canadian commander had seen everything this war could throw at him. The liberation of France. The Scheldt. The Rhine crossing. He thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. The message came through at 0847 hours. Crerar's hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. His chief of staff, Brigadier Churchill Mann, stood in the doorway, his face ashen. Not pale. Ashen. There's a difference. Pale is fear. Ashen is horror. Sir, we have a situation at Friesauth. Crerar looked up. The way Mann said situation made his stomach tighten. In military speak, situation could mean anything from a logistical delay to an absolute catastrophe. The tone told you which. This was the latter. Report. Mann stepped inside, closing the door behind him. That told Crerar everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. You only closed the door for the worst news. The Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders encountered heavy resistance yesterday. Brigadier Medjol was killed by a sniper. Crerar's jaw clenched. Medjol. A good officer. A good man. But war took good men every day. That wasn't why Mann looked like he'd seen a ghost. And? Mann swallowed. Actually swallowed. Crerar had known this man for 3 years. He'd never seen him do that before delivering a report. The men found approximately 100 SS guards in the town. They executed them, sir. All of them. In minutes. The room went silent. Not quiet. Silent. There's a difference. Quiet is the absence of sound. Silent is the presence of something too terrible for sound. Crerar set down his cup slowly. Very slowly. The way you move when you're trying to control something inside you that wants to explode. How many? Approximately 100, sir. The reports are still coming in, but... How many? Exactly. Mann consulted his notes, his hands shaking slightly. Between 95 and 110. The exact count is difficult because of the condition of the bodies. Crerar closed his eyes. Every general faces moments that define their legacy. Victories in battle. Strategic decisions that save thousands of lives. This was not one of those moments. This was the kind of moment that could destroy everything he'd built. Everything his men had fought for. Tell me exactly what happened. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. Mann opened his folder. His fingers left sweat marks on the paper. April 13, 1945. The Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada entered Friesauth as part of the final push into Germany. The town was supposed to be lightly defended. Intelligence suggested minimal resistance. They were wrong. Crerar leaned forward. Continue. The Germans had fortified the town. Not just Wehrmacht. SS. Hardcore SS fanatics who'd been told to fight to the last man. They meant it. Snipers in every building. Machine gun nests on every corner. The Argylls walked into a killing ground. Outside, thunder rolled across the German countryside. Or maybe it was artillery. At this point in the war, it was hard to tell the difference. Brigadier Frederick Medjol was leading from the front. You know how he was, sir. Always with his men. Always visible. The Germans knew it too. They'd been watching. Waiting. Mann paused. Crerar gestured for him to continue. 1,430 hours. Medjol was moving between positions, coordinating the assault. A single shot. High-velocity rifle. Caught him in the head. He was dead before he hit the ground. Crerar's fist clenched on the table. Medjol had 3 children back home in Canada. 3 children who would grow up without their father because some fanatic in a black uniform decided that one more dead Allied officer might somehow change the outcome of a war that was already lost. The men saw it happen. They saw their brigadier, a man they loved, a man they'd followed through hell and back, murdered in the street. Something broke inside them, sir. Something fundamental. That's not an excuse for what they did. No, sir. I'm not offering excuses. I'm explaining context. Crerar stood, walking to the window. Outside, Canadian soldiers moved through the occupied German town where he'd set up his headquarters. Young men. Boys really. 18, 19, 20 years old. They'd seen things no human being should see. Done things no human being should do. All in the name of ending a war started by madmen. What happened next? Mann's voice became quieter. The Argylls went berserk, sir. There's no other word for it. They cleared that town building by building, room by room. Every German soldier they found they killed. No prisoners. No mercy. No hesitation. Wehrmacht or SS? Both, sir. They stopped distinguishing. At that point, to them, a German soldier was a German soldier. The enemy who'd killed their commander. Crerar turned back. And the 100 SS guards? They found them in a compound on the eastern edge of town. Some kind of holding facility. The guards were armed but surrounded. They could have surrendered. Some tried to. The Argylls didn't care. They went through that compound like the wrath of God. Rifles, machine guns, grenades. It was over in minutes. Were there any Allied witnesses? Officers. Mann nodded slowly. Several. Lieutenant Colonel Hay tried to stop it. He was ignored. The men were beyond orders at that point. Beyond rank. Beyond discipline. They were beyond everything except rage and grief. Crerar sat back down heavily. This was the nightmare scenario every commander fears. Not defeat in battle. Not tactical failure. Moral collapse. The moment when your army stops being an army and becomes a mob. The moment when the thin line between soldiers and murderers disappears entirely. What's being said? Nothing yet, sir. The men who were there aren't talking. The officers who witnessed it are in shock. Word hasn't spread beyond the immediate units involved. But it will. You know it will. Crerar did know. Secrets in an army are like water in a sieve. They don't stay contained. Someone would talk. Someone always talks. And when they did, this would explode across the Allied command structure like a bomb. Has Montgomery been informed? Not yet, sir. I came to you first. Eisenhower? No, sir. Crerar exhaled slowly. Montgomery was his immediate superior, commanding 21st Army Group. Eisenhower commanded all Allied forces in Europe. Both men would have to know. Both men would have opinions. Both men would have to decide what to do about Canadian soldiers who'd committed what could only be described as a war crime. Except it wasn't that simple. Nothing in war ever was. Get me everything. Every report. Every witness statement. Every piece of evidence. I want to know exactly what happened minute by minute. And I want it within the hour. Mann saluted and left. Crerar stood alone in his office, staring at the maps that showed the final collapse of Nazi Germany. The war was almost over. Almost. But this moment, this terrible moment, would outlive the war. It would outlive all of them. He thought about the men in the Argylls. Farm boys from Ontario. Factory workers from Montreal. University students who'd put their lives on hold to fight fascism. They'd volunteered. Every one of them. They'd crossed the Atlantic knowing they might never come home. They'd landed on D-Day. They'd fought through Normandy, Belgium, Holland. They'd liberated towns and cities. They'd been welcomed as heroes. And now they were executioners. Crerar poured himself a whiskey. He didn't usually drink during duty hours, but these weren't usual hours. Nothing about this was usual. The problem was that he understood. That was the terrible truth gnawing at him. He understood exactly why it happened. Put men in combat long enough, expose them to enough death and horror, kill someone they love right in front of them, and the veneer of civilization cracks. Sometimes it shatters. The SS weren't innocent. Let's be clear about that. The SS were Hitler's elite. They'd run the concentration camps. They'd committed atrocities across Europe that defied comprehension. They'd murdered millions. If any German soldiers deserved to die, it was them. But that wasn't the point. The point was the law. The Geneva Conventions. The rules of war that separated the Allies from the Nazis. The principles that said even in war, even against monsters, there were lines you didn't cross. His men had crossed that line. The question was what to do about it. An hour later, Mann returned with a stack of folders. Crerar spent the next 2 hours reading every report, every witness statement, every piece of evidence. The picture that emerged was both worse and more complicated than he'd initially understood. The SS guards hadn't just been in Friesauth by accident. They'd been running a prisoner of war camp. Canadian prisoners. The Argylls had found evidence that some of those prisoners had been executed. Shot in the back of the head. Left in ditches. War crimes. Clear, undeniable war crimes. When the Argylls found the SS guards, they hadn't just been angry about Megel. They'd been enraged about what had been done to their fellow Canadians. The men who'd been murdered while unarmed and helpless. It didn't justify what happened next. But it explained it. Crerar closed the last folder and looked at Mann. This stays contained. For now. I need to think. Sir, with respect, we can't contain this indefinitely. Too many witnesses. Too many people know. I said for now, Brigadier. That's an order. Mann saluted and left. Crerar sat alone with the weight of command crushing down on him like a physical force. This was what leadership meant. Not the glory. Not the victories. This making decisions that would haunt you forever. He had several options. None of them good. Option 1, full investigation. Court-martial everyone involved. Make an example of the perpetrators. Show the world that Canada held its soldiers to the highest standards. Uphold the law even when it hurt. The problem with option 1 was that it would destroy morale. The Argylls weren't criminals. They were heroes who'd done something terrible in a moment of madness. Court-martialing them would send a message to every Canadian soldier that their sacrifices meant nothing. That after everything they'd endured, their own army would turn on them for one moment of human weakness. Option 2, cover it up. Bury the reports. Intimidate the witnesses. Pretend it never happened. Let the fog of war swallow this incident like it had swallowed so many others. The problem with option 2 was that it violated everything Crerar believed in. He'd spent his entire career building the Canadian Army into a professional fighting force. A force that respected the rules of war. A force that was better than the enemy. Covering this up would make him complicit. It would make him a liar. It would compromise everything he'd fought for. Option 3, limited accountability. Acknowledge what happened. Express regret. Take administrative action against the officers who failed to prevent it. But don't court-martial the soldiers. Frame it as a breakdown of discipline in an extreme situation. Promise better oversight in the future. Move on. Option 3 was the political solution. It wasn't justice, but it wasn't a complete abdication either. It was the messy middle ground where most military leaders lived when the law collided with reality. Crerar hated option 3 because it felt like cowardice, but he was starting to think it might be the only viable path forward. He called for man again. Set up a meeting with the senior officers involved. Tonight. Quietly. No official record. At 2100 hours, 5 men gathered in a requisitioned German farmhouse outside the town. Crerar, man, Lieutenant Colonel Hay of the Argylls, and 2 other battalion commanders from the affected units. They sat around a table meant for a German family that had fled days earlier. Coffee cups, maps, and the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Crerar spoke first. Gentlemen, we all know why we're here. What happened at Frisoid is a stain on this army. It's a violation of everything we're supposed to stand for. The question is what we do about it. Lieutenant Colonel Hay looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. His hands trembled as he held his coffee. Sir, I tried to stop it. I ordered them to cease fire. They didn't listen. They were beyond orders. I'm not blaming you, Colonel. I'm trying to find a path forward. One of the other officers, a major whose name was Dixon, spoke up. With respect, sir, those SS bastards had it coming. We found evidence they'd executed Canadian POWs. They'd murdered unarmed men. What our boys did was rough justice, but it was justice. Crerar's voice became ice. Justice is what happens in a courtroom, Major. What happened at Frisoid was revenge. There's a difference. And if we don't acknowledge that difference, we become no better than the enemy we're fighting. The room went silent. The uncomfortable kind of silent where everyone's thinking the same thing but nobody wants to say it. Finally, man broke the tension. Sir, what are you proposing? Crerar took a deep breath. This was the moment. The decision that would define his legacy. Here's what's going to happen. We're going to document everything. Every detail. Every witness statement. Every piece of evidence. It's all going into a sealed file that will be classified for 50 years. Future historians will have access to the truth. We're not hiding it. We're not lying about it. But we're not prosecuting it either. Hay looked up, hope flickering in his exhausted eyes. Sir? The men who did this were pushed beyond their breaking point. They just watched their beloved commander murdered. They discovered evidence of atrocities against their comrades. They were exhausted, traumatized, and enraged. What they did was wrong. Absolutely wrong. But it was understandable. Human. And I will not destroy the lives of men who've given everything for this country by court-martialing them for one moment of madness in the final weeks of the war. Major Dixon exhaled audibly. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. Here's the other part. Every officer present at Frisoid receives a formal letter of reprimand for failure to maintain discipline. That goes in your permanent records. Your careers are effectively over. You'll never make general. You'll never receive the honors you might otherwise have earned. That's the price of command. You were there. You failed to stop it. You bear responsibility. The officers exchanged glances. It was harsh, but it was also merciful compared to what could have happened. Crerar continued. The enlisted men involved receive no punishment. No record. No mention. They go home as heroes because that's what they are. Heroes who did something terrible. Both things can be true simultaneously. And if word gets out? Man asked. If the press learns what happened? Then we tell the truth. We don't lie. We don't cover up. We explain the context. We acknowledge the wrongdoing. We accept responsibility. But we also defend our men. We explain what they'd endured. What they'd witnessed. What drove them to that moment. And we dare anyone to judge them who wasn't there. Who didn't see what they saw. Who didn't feel what they felt. Crerar stood, commanding the room with his presence. Gentlemen, this war is almost over. In a few weeks, maybe days, Germany will surrender. Our boys will go home. They'll try to rebuild their lives after experiencing hell on earth. What happened at Frisoith will haunt some of them forever. That's punishment enough. I will not add to their burden by branding them as war criminals. Are we clear? The officers stood and saluted. Yes, sir. After they left, only man remained. He looked at Crerar with something approaching awe. Sir, that was the right decision. A hard decision. But the right one. Crerar poured himself another whiskey. His hands weren't entirely steady. I hope history agrees with you, Brigadier. I sincerely hope history agrees. But the story doesn't end there. It never does. The easy part was making the decision. The hard part was living with it. Over the next few days, Crerar personally visited the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders. He didn't announce his visit. No fanfare. No ceremony. He just showed up at their positions, walking among the men who'd been at Frisoith. They recognized him immediately. When a general shows up unannounced, soldiers get nervous. They wondered if this was the hammer falling. If they were about to pay for what they'd done. Crerar gathered them in a bombed-out church. About 50 men. The ones who'd been there. The ones who'd pulled the triggers. The ones who'd become executioners. He stood before them without notes. Without prepared remarks. Just a general and his soldiers in a destroyed building in a defeated country, having a conversation that would never appear in any official history. I know what happened at Frisoith. I know what you did. I know why you did it. And I want you to understand something. You're not being court-martialed. You're not being punished. You're going home as the heroes you are. The relief in that church was palpable. Men who'd been carrying crushing guilt, expecting military prison or worse, suddenly able to breathe again. But Crerar wasn't finished. However, I need you to understand something else. What you did was wrong. Morally wrong. Legally wrong. No matter how justified it felt in the moment, no matter what those SS guards had done, no matter how much pain you were in, it was wrong. And I need you to carry that truth with you. The room went silent again. Different kind of silent. The kind where truth lands like a bomb but doesn't destroy, just transforms. You're going to go home. You're going to marry sweethearts. Have children. Build lives. And some dark night years from now, you're going to lie awake and think about what you did at Frisoith. And it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt like hell. That hurt is important. That hurt is what keeps you human. Don't run from it. Don't drown it. Feel it. Remember it. Let it remind you of who you became in that moment and who you choose to be every day after. A young private, couldn't have been more than 20, raised his hand. Crerar nodded at him. Sir, what if we can't forget? What if it haunts us forever? Crerar's expression softened. Then it haunts you. That's the price we pay for what war makes us do. I can't take that burden from you. I can only tell you that you're not alone in carrying it. And that carrying it makes you stronger than you know. He paused, looking at each face. Farm boys. Students. Workers. Ordinary men who'd done extraordinary things, both heroic and horrible. Brigadier Medjol was a good man. A great commander. He wouldn't have wanted what happened at Frisoith. But he would have understood it. He would have known that war pushes men beyond their limits. And he would have wanted you to come home. To live. To remember him not with violence but with the lives you build in peace. Another soldier, older, maybe mid-30s, spoke up. Sir, what about justice? For what those SS guards did to our boys. Justice is what we're building by winning this war. By destroying the Nazi regime. By liberating the camps. By putting the leaders on trial at Nuremberg. Justice isn't what happened at Frisoith. That was revenge. And revenge never brings peace. Not to the dead. Not to the living. Remember that. Crerar left that church knowing he'd done something that would never appear in his official record but might be the most important thing he'd done as a commander. He'd given his men permission to be human. to have failed, to carry their guilt without being destroyed by it. But the situation wasn't over. Word was spreading. Not publicly, not yet, but through military channels. Montgomery heard about it. Eisenhower heard about it. And Crerar received a summons to 21st Army Group headquarters. Montgomery was waiting in his caravan, the mobile headquarters he'd used throughout the campaign. He was studying maps when Crerar entered, but they both knew this meeting had nothing to do with maps. "Harry, sit down." Crerar sat. Montgomery poured tea. Very British. Very civilized. A stark contrast to what they were about to discuss. "I've heard disturbing reports about an incident at Frisoith. An incident involving Canadian forces under your command. An incident involving the summary execution of approximately 100 German soldiers. Would you care to explain?" Crerar had prepared for this moment. He gave Montgomery the full briefing. Every detail. No sugar-coating. No excuses. Just facts. When he finished, Montgomery set down his teacup with deliberate care. "This is a catastrophe. If this becomes public, it will undermine everything we've fought for. The moral high ground we've maintained throughout this war. Our reputation as civilized nations fighting barbarism." "I'm aware, sir." "Are you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've decided to sweep a war crime under the rug to protect your men." Crerar's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, that's not what I'm doing. I'm acknowledging that war is hell. That men pushed beyond their limits sometimes break. That justice needs to be tempered with mercy. Those men aren't war criminals. They're traumatized soldiers who lost control for a few terrible minutes. The Geneva Conventions don't have exceptions for trauma, Harry. Then perhaps the Geneva Conventions don't account for reality. Those men watched their commander murdered. They discovered evidence of atrocities against Canadian POWs. They'd been fighting for years without break. Something snapped. I won't destroy their lives for it." Montgomery stood, pacing the small space of his caravan. This was the field marshal who'd led the 8th Army to victory at El Alamein, who'd commanded all Allied ground forces on D-Day, who'd driven across Europe to the heart of Germany. He'd seen everything war could offer. And now he was wrestling with the same impossible decision Crerar had faced. "What do you want from me, Harry?" "I want your support. I want you to back my decision to handle this administratively rather than criminally. I want you to help me protect men who've given everything for this war. And if I refuse? If I order a full investigation and courts-martial? Then you'll get them. And you'll break the Canadian Army. And for what? To punish exhausted soldiers for being human? To prove we're better than the Nazis by destroying our own men? I won't accept that, sir." With respect. The tension in that caravan was thick enough to cut. Two generals. Two visions of justice. Two paths forward. Only one could prevail. Finally, Montgomery turned back to Crerar. His expression was unreadable. "I fought at Ypres in the First War. I watched men crack under artillery bombardment. I saw shell-shock cases shot for cowardice. I saw the army destroy men who'd given their sanity for their country. I swore if I ever had command I'd never do that. I'd never let the system destroy men who'd already sacrificed everything." Crerar felt hope kindle. "Sir? I'm not approving what happened at Frisoith. I can't. It was wrong. Fundamentally wrong. But I'm not going to crucify Canadian soldiers in the final days of the war for one moment of madness. Your administrative approach stands. But Harry, if word gets out, if this becomes a scandal, I will throw you to the wolves to protect the alliance. Understand?" "I understand, sir." "Good. Now get out of here before I change my mind." Crerar left feeling like he'd won a battle but might still lose the war. Because Montgomery was right. If this became public, if the press got hold of it, if the Americans or British or Soviets decided to make an issue of it, no amount of context or mercy would save him or his men. The next threat came from an unexpected direction. The press. A Canadian war correspondent named Monroe had heard rumors. He'd been at the front long enough to know when something was being hushed up. He submitted questions to Canadian Military Public Affairs. Questions about unusual activity at Frisoith. Questions about reports of executions. Questions about why the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders had suddenly gone silent about a battle they'd otherwise have celebrated. The questions landed on Crerar's desk like grenades. This was the nightmare. This was how secrets exploded. Not through official channels but through journalists doing their jobs. Crerar called Monroe to his headquarters. The correspondent arrived expecting a routine interview. He got something very different. "Mr. Monroe, what you're investigating is real. It happened. And if you publish it, You'll destroy the lives of dozens of Canadian soldiers who've served with distinction throughout this war. Monroe, to his credit, didn't flinch. General, with respect, that's not my concern. My concern is the truth. What happened at Frysoweth? Crerar told him. Everything. The same unvarnished truth he'd told Montgomery. Monroe listened without interrupting, his pencil motionless on his notepad. When Crerar finished, Monroe sat back. That's quite a story. It's not a story. It's a tragedy. A tragedy that will become a catastrophe if you publish it. General, you're asking me to suppress the truth. To participate in a cover-up. That goes against everything I believe as a journalist. I'm asking you to show mercy. To consider that publishing this story will serve no purpose except to hurt men who've already suffered enough. The war is ending. These soldiers will go home. They'll carry the weight of what they did for the rest of their lives. Is adding public shame and potential prosecution to that burden really serving the public interest? Monroe was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. What about accountability? What about justice for the executed Germans? The Germans who were executed were SS guards who'd murdered Canadian POWs. They weren't innocent. They were war criminals themselves. Does that justify what happened? No. But it provides context. And context matters. So you want me to kill the story. I want you to think about what publishing it will accomplish. Who it will help. Who it will hurt. And whether the truth in this case serves justice or simply satisfies curiosity at the expense of men who deserve better. Monroe stood, folding his notepad. His face was unreadable. I need to think about this, General. Take your time. But understand that once that story runs, there's no taking it back. The damage will be permanent. Monroe left without another word. Crerar stood at the window, watching the correspondent walk across the muddy compound. Everything he'd built, everything he'd fought for, now rested in the hands of one man with a pencil and a conscience. The next week was agony. Every morning Crerar scanned the newspapers, expecting to see the headline that would destroy everything. Every phone call made his stomach drop. Every knock on his door could be the end. The story never ran. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. The war ended. The soldiers went home. And the secret of Frysoweth remained buried in classified files and troubled consciences. Years later, after Monroe had retired from journalism, someone asked him why he'd killed the story. His answer was simple. Because sometimes the truth does more harm than good. Those men had suffered enough. They'd carry Frysoweth with them forever. They didn't need the world's judgment added to their own. So I made a choice. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe I betrayed my principles as a journalist. But I'd make the same choice again. Some truths can wait. Some stories are better left untold until the people involved have had a chance to find whatever peace they can. Crerar never knew for certain why Monroe had shown mercy. But he suspected it was because the correspondent had seen enough of war himself. Had understood that the men who fight aren't statistics or abstractions. They're human beings pushed to their absolute limits. And sometimes, when they break, the most just thing to do is help them pick up the pieces rather than grinding those pieces into dust. That's the legacy of Frysoweth. Not justice. Not vengeance. Not even truth, really. But mercy. Complicated, imperfect, ethically ambiguous mercy. The kind that recognizes we're all capable of terrible things under terrible circumstances. The kind that chooses compassion over condemnation. The kind that lets broken men try to heal rather than destroying them further. Crerar carried that choice until he died. So did the soldiers who were there. So did Monroe. And now we carry it too. The burden of understanding that war creates impossible situations with no good answers. Only choices. Hard choices. Choices that haunt you forever regardless of what you decide. But choices that must be made nonetheless.